one important factor we want to remember when we think about what history is that there's history, which is what we read about, what historians write, and then there is the past. The past does not change, but we don't know everything about the past. History does change. The word comes from the original Greek historia, which means a certain kind of story or a certain kind of narrative. And so history is kind of a grand story about what happened in the past. And stories are interpretive, they change. The past doesn't change, but history does change. Historians are constantly revising it. And so what we know about the past, how we think about it, how we conceive of it, that's constantly in flux. And so that's something to remember. That history is not the past. History is the story of what happened in the past, interpreted by whoever's telling it and whoever's listening to it. Uh, so the goal for us as students of history is to try to improve our historical thinking skills. Uh, and we're going to try to do that throughout the course. You want, in the way you think historically, is you evaluate and analyze sources, you contextualize them, you corroborate those sources or combine them, then you explain the sources, and then you arrive upon an historical conclusion. So we're going to be doing that all term. Uh, why is history something we should study? And this is something I usually discuss in class more, but you've probably encountered this quote before. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Said by philosopher George Santayana in the early 20th century in a book that he wrote about something unrelated to history. So it was a philosophical treatise. The thing about this quote is that historians don't really like it. It's something that people like to use in pop culture a lot, but historians hate the term because the past it doesn't repeat itself. Remember, the past is the past, and it doesn't change. And what happened in the past is a fixed phenomena, and you don't repeat the exact same conditions. So historians actually hate that quote because it makes people think that the past just continually revolves like a wave, that there's similarities or the same patterns that happen over and over again. There's a little bit of truth to that in the sense that human behavior has patterns, human psychology has patterns, but the past never repeats in the sense of there are always different times, different people, different contexts, and those change with every era. What he was really trying to say is, if you look at the quote in context here, progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. When change is absolute, there remains no being to improve, and no direction is set for possible improvement. And when experience is not retained, as among savages, infancy is perpetual. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's really not something historical, but I think what he was trying to say is that if you don't have a sense of where you are or where you were, you'll never get a sense of where you're going. Kind of like a GPS device that can't find your position or your direction that you're moving in, it's going to send you in the wrong direction. Santayana's philosophy of progress was trying to use that kind of concept in terms of human philosophical progress. The quote I like better about history is from a play written by William Faulkner, in which a character said, "The past is never dead; it's not even past." And so this is something very true for the subjects we're going to study. That these huge events that shape the time we live in, uh, there's things that happened or things we're still dealing with now. The past uh, influences us in profound ways, and we can't avoid that. Other reasons I think you should take history: like any liberal arts class, history develops your writing, research, and critical thinking skills. But honestly, that's something every liberal arts class is going to say they do. But where history gives you advantage is that you develop these skills in the context of learning about reality. Uh, it's not made up. Uh, these are actual humans that went through these things, and we study the past as it was, not in some kind of theoretical models or something like that. History helps you become more knowledgeable and educated. It's useful in pretty much any field, I think, and it's something that you'll use. The skills of determining causality. That's a skill that you'll use in almost any field. So, and the skills of analyzing someone or something's past or things you're going to do throughout your life. And hopefully, it shouldn't be boring. I mean, hopefully, the story of humanity, and where it was and how it became to be in the current time, should hopefully be something at least somewhat interesting. Also, I think it gives people an historical sense, which I'll illustrate here. Before I do that, though, excuse me, we want to think about what sources historians use, how we study history. So there are artifacts, which are items that were made in the past by humans and or used by humans, and that we analyze. So the realm of artifacts is in the discipline of archaeology. Historians don't actually deal with artifacts too much. I mean, we display them in museums and things like that, but archaeologists are really the ones who analyze them. What historians really need are written sources. If we don't have writing, historians have a struggle. And so a primary source is anything written, any kind of documentation or any kind of source that can be interpreted, that's more than an object, distinct from an object. So typically a written document, but can be any kind of written document or any kind of visual aid from the past as a primary source, and that's the main tool that historians use. Secondary sources are like books about history. So if you read a book about the American colonies here, like I've got pictured, that's a secondary source that the historian Ellen Taylor wrote using a lot of primary sources. There's what I call bridge sources, which illustrated by an autobiography here by Benjamin Franklin. These are part primary, part secondary. They're primary in the sense that they come from the subject from the past. The subject wrote the source, and so it's primary in that sense, but it's also secondary in that it's an autobiography written late in life, about early in life. There's obviously some separation there. And then tertiary sources, those are like your encyclopedias, your textbooks, things like that.